This week on Focus Asia, China in sickness and in health. Can these patients win compensation for their medical mistreatment? Unexploded bombs in Southeast Asia, the legacy of the Vietnam War. And Ready, Aim, Fire, the pistol-packing mamas of India.
Hello from our studios in Hong Kong and welcome to Focus Asia. I'm Jennifer Lee. We start with a story about healthcare in China and the legal system reforming very slowly, which might offer hope to people in a fight for their medical rights. Dr. Yu Weihua and his wife were expecting their first child. Dr. Yu checked his wife into a hospital in Guangzhou, China, but within an hour of an apparently normal birth, the Yu's baby daughter was dead. The Yus have now joined a growing number of patients in China suing for medical malpractice. Here's Mark New.
It was supposed to be a day to rejoice. An anxious father expecting the birth of his first child. Instead, it was at this hospital where a father's joy turned to horror.
I waited outside a long time, until 2:30 in the morning. Finally, the doctor came out and said the baby had been delivered, but had some problems. There was water flowing out of her mouth and nose. The doctor said he was saving her, but an hour later he came out and told me my baby was dead.
It was a tragedy, but one Yu Weihua wasn't prepared to accept. Yu is a doctor himself, and his wife a nurse. After doing some research on his own, Yu is convinced his baby's death was avoidable and that doctors were negligent.
They placed the oxygen monitoring machine there, but left it unattended while it made warning sounds for assistance. My wife notified the doctor when the machine rang the first time. The doctor came over and said the machine was faulty and not to worry about it. It continued to beep, and my wife didn't say a word, thinking there wasn't a problem.
Reports from both the Guangzhou Mother and Infant Hospital and the Health Department say the hospital is not at fault. But in a bold move in China, Dr. Yu has decided to sue the state-run hospital. He says he's been pressured not to proceed, though he won't say by whom. Surprisingly, Dr. Yu does have some support within China's tightly controlled media. This cartoon appeared in a local newspaper next to Yu's story. A government cadre with his arm around a doctor shows a woman and child a certificate with the words natural death. Dr. Yu says it's only since losing his child that he's realized how the legal system is stacked against the patient.
It's difficult in a sense, for lawyers reject taking such cases. They say it's meaningless if the health department has already said it's not their fault.
Dr. Yu's lawyer told us that many attorneys refuse to take malpractice cases because of their lack of knowledge about medicine and the laws governing it. Ang Yu Kim is a former judge from mainland China. He now works in Hong Kong as a research fellow for Chinese University's law program. He acknowledges that trying to sue a state-run hospital can be tough.
If you sue a government, it is difficult because the court is under the government sometimes.
But picking a fight is exactly what's happened not far away in the Chinese city of Shenzhen. In one of the biggest lawsuits in China ever, disgruntled patients filed compensation claims totaling nearly $30 million. Behind me is the Shenzhen Women and Children's Hospital, the site where 2 years ago, a sanitation blunder led to a major medical mess. Nearly 170 people suffered injuries, with many of them still unsatisfied today with the way they've been treated. An investigation found disinfectant used to sterilize surgical instruments was too diluted. The victims of that mistake were mostly women giving birth, particularly those having C-sections. Their wounds were infected, forcing them to spend 6 months in the hospital. They claim they still feel sick to this day.
The continued medication has greatly weakened my immune system. I tend to catch the flu and get sick more often.
The women have been waiting and waiting for justice. or at least the chance at justice.
It has been 2 years since we filed this lawsuit, but nothing has been done so far. The court hasn't even opened the case yet. We would like the Court of Justice to ask the hospital to compensate for the suffering they have brought upon us, physically, mentally, and financially.
Mrs. Jan, who chose to remain anonymous, went to the same hospital for an operation for an ectopic pregnancy, where the embryo develops in the fallopian tube rather than the womb. Her wounds later swelled and filled with pus.
It was so painful and emotionally draining. Every day I was injected 4 or 5 bottles. My hands became so swollen there was no longer any place for the injections.
Fearing a trial would be too costly, she agreed to an out-of-court settlement with the hospital, receiving about $8,000. But Mrs. Jan now accuses the hospital of failing to live up to that agreement by not paying for continued treatment, even though she still feels faint and has stomach and joint pain. The hospital says those problems are unrelated to the original infection. Mrs. Jan is now attempting to sue, though she's not confident about the outcome. Some of the patients say the health department, hospital representatives, and even the Public Security Bureau have paid visits to patients, telling them not to sue. We contacted the lawyer representing the hospital. She told Focus Asia the hospital had already admitted making the disinfectant mistake, and they are willing to compensate, but the amount is for the court to decide. Ironically, the Shenzhen Women and Children's Hospital has applied for a National Science Award for its methods of detecting the bacteria involved in this case.
It's easy to still think about my baby. I'm 30, and people usually ask whether you have sons or daughters. People who know that my wife was pregnant before ask me whether it's a boy or a girl. Also, when I see television commercials about baby products, well, then I think of her.
The Yus still hold on to items that were meant to be given to their daughter. After what's happened, the couple is uneasy about the thought of having another, for they will have a lifetime of memories of a child who lived but 1 hour.
Coming up on Focus Asia, women and guns in India. The next, a legacy of the war in Vietnam. The tiny, landlocked Southeast Asian nation of Laos, only 5 million people. 30 years ago, it was central to the Vietnam War. North Vietnam sent troops down the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos to fight the South. The American response created one of the most bombed-out places on Earth. U.S. planes attacked targets in Laos every day for 9 years. All these years later, unexploded ordnance, or UXOs, litter the Lao countryside. And more civilians are being killed or injured now than during the war. As Susan Yu reports, a brave group of volunteers is working hard to defuse the danger.
From the air and on the ground, the scars are visible. Bomb craters and UXOs riddle the country. Now, with the help of 6 international NGOs, the government's UXO Lao program has been able to carry out and maintain work in 9 of the most contaminated provinces. It's a hopeful scenario for people like Bonso Samai, who's been with UXO Lao for 2 years.
Because people are poor, we are doing something that's helping. That's why I enjoy my job. We have experts here to train us on how to deal with the bombs, so I am not afraid.
In 5 years, more than 1,000 hectares of land have been cleared. Since the national program started, more than 250,000 bombs have been destroyed. But the government acknowledges it has a long ways to go. It estimates it will take decades just to clear priority areas alone. Cam Ranh province borders Vietnam. Its remote Vulapa district, was part of the main entry point for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Aerial bombings during the war made it one of the most severely contaminated districts in Laos.
They are designed for massive amount of damage because in these areas here it's very hard to see troop movement, and it's very hard to see materials that have been stockpiled.
It was only recently that demining work started in the isolated district.
The ordnance that was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail as such was very, very different to what I'd ever experienced in any other country.
Technical advisor Stuart Broom shows us the endless hazards.
First thing we have to do is walk up to it, and we have to try and identify what type of bomb it is, and in particular the type of fusing system that it has, before we can actually deal with the bomb itself. This is an AN 500. It's a 500-pound bomb. It could be up to hundreds that haven't gone off, that are actually under the ground and in the ground.
Just across the road, his point becomes clear.
So with this one, we'll leave this one here, and later on we'll set it up to neutralise the fuse. That is, we'll knock the fuse off this. And then we can pick the bomb up and take it away to a demolition area.
And just 10 meters away.
It's called a 20-pound fragmentation bomb, because once this detonates, these bands uncompress and are thrown out to cause immense damage to vehicles and personnel.
Getting rid of the bombs called for hours of planning, extra care, and manpower. The clearance team prepares to neutralize a fuse.
Right, sometimes we can just leave the people here that are going to be capping up, and everybody else moves down to the safe area.
The bomb is now disarmed and ready for disposal. But as soon as that's done, it's back to dealing with another discovery. This bomb is found near the river and is too dangerous to move. It has to be blown up on the spot. The work never ends.
Generally, they won't work any more than 40 minutes.
An hour and a half away, Ian Mulroy shows us the most common UXO found in Laos, the Blue 26, known by locals as the Bombi.
The BLU-26 is anti-personnel bomb live units, and they consist of two halves, a cast explosive inside and a fuse. The two halves are actually made up of hundreds and hundreds of these small ball bearings, and they're designed that as they fly through the air after being dropped from their dispenser from the aircraft, they'll spin, and hence all these little fins on the outside.
One cluster bomb dispenser held roughly 300 of these Bombis. Their range is deadly. Within 150 meters, they can maim. Within 20, they can kill. An estimated 285 million Bombis reigned over Indochina. More than half ended up in Laos, leaving villagers in constant danger. More than 100 Bombis have been found on this site alone. There are just as many, if not more, still buried deep underground. Those will be left alone. The main priority is hazard reduction, and that's making sure villagers can walk these trails safely. And then there's the UXO Lao Community Awareness Program. It reaches out to villagers, educating them, especially the children, on the dangers of UXOs. The program teaches them how to spot bombs and report them to clearance teams in their districts. But in remote areas like Bulapa, getting the word out is still a problem. These children seek old bomb dispensers to sell as scrap metal or use them in their villages. They say it's something their parents have done in the past.
This is very common because the people here are the poorest of the poor, and they need to use everything they can find in the area, and of course the refuse of war is as you've seen everywhere. And what they'll do with this is take this home and they'll put it up into their village, and they'll actually grow herbs and probably spring onions in this.
And what about leftover missiles? 2 villagers died after trying to retrieve explosives and fuel from this Russian surface-to-air missile found in the river. Before they were killed, the villagers managed to drag the main part of the SAM rocket onto land, without realizing the warhead was still intact.
I don't like this piece of ordnance.
And more than 30 years on, we discover the missile's electronic system is still live.
There are a lot of weapons here that we have never seen before. Some of the earlier missiles, some of the earlier guided bomb type weapons.
So, is it difficult getting information on these bombs?
It is if the information is still classified. It's very hard to get it released. If it's declassified, then we quite often get very helpful responses from the Americans, the Russians.
So ironically, the US's once classified information on bombing missions is now giving the Laos government added ammunition against UXOs. The Pentagon declassified documents on pilot debriefings on every American bombing mission flown over Laos and their targets. But all these years later, the unintentional bombing targets have become children.
He been injured.
These 2 children were picking vegetables when they dug up a bombie instead. Their brother died. As Lao farmers explore new land across this tiny nation, they stumble across old dangers. Unless the bomb disposal teams can work faster, 30 years after the war, many more children will be killed or maimed.
Next, a final report from India. Crime and women. In rural India, women are sometimes the victims of horrendous crimes, the burnings of brides and disputes over dowries being the most extreme example. The crimes often reflect a woman's subservient role in traditional society. But now some women are fighting back, taking the law into their own hands. Rob McBride went to the village of Jowri in the north-central Indian state of Uttar Pradesh to find women with guns aiming higher.
It's an early morning routine as changeless as the countryside of Uttar Pradesh itself. An endless list of chores done the old-fashioned way by hand, or more accurately, the old-fashioned Uttar Pradesh way by women's hands. The churning of the butter for breakfast and the peeling of the potatoes for lunch, while younger, nimbler female fingers sift through the rice. When that's done, the washing of the clothes and the washing of the cow. And what else was there to do this morning? Oh, that's right, clean the guns. In the village of Jowri, the men may wear the trousers and hold the purse strings, but it's the women who have their fingers on the trigger. Welcome to the Jowri Gun Club, a converted courtyard in the middle of the village that has not only spawned some excellent shots, it has also been the cradle for a little village revolution. For the women of Jowri, both the young and the not so young, have discovered through the tiny lead pellets of their air rifles and pistols a sense of worth that has stretched far beyond the walls of the yard itself.
My grandkids first got me started. I went along and began getting 9s and then 10s in the centre of the target, and I thought, yes, this is all right, I can do this. And it was then that I decided to take it up seriously.
The idea of setting up the club came from the village doctor as a way of curing some unpleasant social ills.
It was a way of tackling crime and promoting education. This is a high-crime area, and teenagers were often getting into trouble. So this was a way of keeping them busy and teaching them not to have a negative outlook on life. It helps them become far more positive about themselves and their education, to instill in them a sense of purpose.
But soon after the club was founded, the village began to experience an interesting side effect. In this most traditional of areas, women have always played a subservient role. A veiled existence lived in the shadow of their menfolk. Not so for the women members of the gun club.
Women should have the confidence to do something as well as the boys can.
As well as, and often better. The male ego here has taken as much of a battering as the bullseye in the center of the target.
Boys can't concentrate. It's the women who do the responsible things like housework. Boys can't take anything seriously and just fool around.
What the boys have often been good at in this part of Uttar Pradesh is crime, and in particular so-called dowry burnings. Wives dying in mysterious kitchen fires, allowing the men to remarry and secure another dowry. Surprise, surprise, such accidents have more or less ceased in Jewry, along with most other forms of crime. It's left the police here with few criminals to chase, which is a shame because the local force can boast India's tallest policeman. At 7'4", Senior Inspector Dharam Singh is the kind of policeman you call Sir, an imposing figure able to strike fear into the heart of any lawbreaker, if only he and his boys could find one.
The standard of shooting at the club in this village is very high, and since they started the club, we have seen that criminals have actually run away from this area.
It's not difficult to see why the criminals have fled when you see 61-year-old Prakasi Toma in action. Her first shot with this type of handgun at a target more than 20 meters away.
The old women are still very active, doing lots of physical work that keeps them very fit. They don't have any blood pressure problems. Their eyesight is still very good, and they don't have any mental tensions. So their powers of concentration are very high indeed, even though a lot of them are 60 or even older.
Shot number 2, and Prakasi has got her eye in. The kind of rock-steady gaze down the barrel that says, "Don't mess with me." You soon get the feeling this woman could shoot the eye out of a crow at 100 paces. Still, she's not entirely happy. I was aiming for the 10 in the center, she tells us. I guess I'll have to settle for the 9. And they're from different competitions? It's that killer instinct that has brought her and her village glory, as well as competition medals. Lots of them. Prizes from local competitions won by herself and also her sister-in-law next door, and their daughters and granddaughters.
When I am winning medals, everyone is happy. My family and friends, in fact the whole village, congratulate me.
What's more, those competitions have begun to look not so local. The biggest success to date are gold and silver for one villager at last year's South Asian Games. Here it seems winning is infectious. If your neighbour is off busy winning medals on the shooting range, then it's not long before you start thinking maybe I could be doing the same. And soon the sense of empowerment is spreading throughout the whole village. Today in Jewry, while crime is down, village pride is definitely up. For the men and women of this club, winning has now become a civic duty.
When they first set up this gun club, it made a big difference. For the first time, we felt we could do something with our lives, not only for the sake of the village, but also for the nation.
And a whole new generation of villagers are setting their sights much higher, no longer content with second best.
No one has gone to the Olympics yet, but there are 4 people from this village who've taken part in international tournaments, and there are some people from our village who are now working for the likes of Indian Airlines. Before, villagers used to aim for menial jobs, but now, psychologically, they are far more ambitious, having the confidence to apply for, say, management-type positions.
And the message is spreading. Dr. Rajpal Singh has been called in by the people of nearby Kekra village to hold an impromptu shooting class there. Not surprisingly, it's the village's head woman who wants to shoot first. Yes, it's louder than she thought. Just one thing though, was there anyone in the house they were shooting at?
No.
On second thoughts, maybe a quick check just in case.
This is confirmed.
With a limited supply of doors, the sooner they have a proper range, the better, as they set out to emulate the Jory achievements, picking up a gun and never being quite the same woman ever again.
Rob McBride with the gun-toting women of India. And that's all we have time for in this edition of Focus Asia. Next week, we'll be back with more wide-ranging reports from across this region. If you want to read and watch more stories about Asia, see our website at focusasia.startv.com. From all of us here in Hong Kong, thanks for watching. I'm Jennifer Lee. See you next week.